What would you do if the one person you trusted most betrayed you in the cruelest way imaginable? For Sarah, that question wasn't hypothetical, it was her reality, unfolding in the suffocating walls of her childhood home. The air was thick with the scent of rosemary and betrayal, and the clock on the wall ticked louder than a racing heart. She stood at the kitchen counter, staring at the plate of spaghetti her mother, Evelyn, had lovingly prepared for her two children, Mia and Lucas. The sauce glistened under the fluorescent light, but something was off. A faint, unnatural shimmer clung to the edges of the noodles, like a secret too toxic to stay hidden. Sarah's hands trembled as she scraped a sample into a small container. This was the third time this week she'd noticed Ida's strange, bitter smell, a slight discoloration in the food her mother insisted on cooking for her kids. The first time, she dismissed it as paranoia, a side effect of the stress from moving back home after her divorce. The second time, she sent a sample to a lab, her gut twisting with dread. The results came back yesterday. Traces of antifreeze, a silent killer, laced into the mashed potatoes served to her 8-year-old twins. Now, here it was again, undeniable and deliberate. Evelyn, her mother, had always been controlling, her love a double-edged sword sharpened by criticism and guilt. Growing up, Sarah had learned to navigate her mother's moods, tiptoeing around her demands to keep the peace. But this was no overbearing lecture or passive-aggressive jab. This was poison, slipped into the meals of her children, the only light in Sarah's unraveling world. Why? The question gnawed at her, but answers were a luxury she couldn't afford right now. She had to act. The dining room was quiet when Sarah walked in, the container of tainted spaghetti hidden in her pocket. Mia and Lucas sat at the table, their forks poised above their plates, their laughter fading as they sensed their mother's tension. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun, her smile as warm as a snake's. "Eat up, darlings," she cooed, her eyes flickering to Sarah. "I made it just for you." Sarah's stomach churned. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but her children were watching, their innocent faces unaware of the danger. She forced a smile, her voice steady. "Not tonight, Mom. I've got something special planned." She gathered their plates, ignoring Evelyn's raised eyebrow, and dumped the food into the trash. The act felt like a small rebellion, a spark in the dark. That night, Sarah lay awake, the lab report burning a hole in her mind. Antifreeze. Odorless, tasteless, deadly. Her mother, the woman who'd raised her, was trying to kill her children. The why was a tangled mesh: jealousy, control, or something darker, but the how was clear. She couldn't let it happen again. She needed proof, a confrontation, a way to protect her kids without tearing their world apart. The next morning, Sarah found an unexpected ally. Mrs. Carter, the elderly neighbor who'd lived across the street for decades, knocked on the door with a thermos of tea and a knowing look. "I saw your mother in her garden last night," she whispered, her voice low. "She was digging near the shed, hiding something. I don't trust her, Sarah. Never have." Mrs. Carter's words were a lifeline, a confirmation that Sarah wasn't losing her mind. She'd always dismissed the old woman's gossip as meddling, but now her suspicions aligned with Sarah's fears. Together, they devised a plan. Sarah would confront Evelyn publicly, where she couldn't twist the narrative or charm her way out. The annual neighborhood potluck was that evening, a perfect stage. Sarah spent the day preparing, her hands shaking as she cooked a dish of her own, a mirror of Evelyn's spaghetti, but safe, untouched. She also slipped the lab report into her purse, its weight a reminder of the truth she carried. The potluck buzzed with laughter and chatter. The community gathered under string lights in the park. Evelyn was in her element, flitting between tables, her charm disarming everyone. Sarah watched her mother serve her signature dish, a creamy casserole, to the neighbors, her smile never faltering. The sight made Sarah's blood boil. How could she play the doting grandmother while poisoning her own flesh and blood? When a moment came, Sarah stood, her voice cutting through the noise. "Everyone, I need your attention." The crowd fell silent, eyes turning to her. Evelyn's smile froze. Sarah held up the lab report, her hand steady now. "This is proof that my mother has been poisoning my children's food. Antifreeze 3 times this week." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Evelyn's face paled, but she laughed, a brittle sound. "Sarah, you're exhausted. You're imagining things." Sarah didn't flinch. She grabbed Evelyn's casserole dish, the one her mother had proudly presented, and marched to the nearest trash can. With every eye on her, she upended it, the food splattering into the bin. "If it's so safe, Mom, why don't you eat it?" she challenged. The crowd murmured, tension crackling like static. Evelyn's mask slipped, her eyes darting to the spilled food, then back to Sarah. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mrs. Carter stepped forward, her frail frame belying her fire. "I saw you, Evelyn, last night, burying bottles in your garden. I dug one up." She held up a small vial, its contents glinting in the light. The crowd erupted in whispers. Evelyn's composure shattered, her voice rising in denial, but the evidence was damning. The neighbors, once charmed, now looked at her with suspicion. Sarah's heart pounded, but she felt a strange relief. The truth was out, raw and ugly, but it was hers to wield. She turned to her children, who stood wide-eyed at the edge of the crowd, and knelt before them. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, pulling them close. "I'll never let anyone hurt you again." The aftermath was chaos. Evelyn was taken in for questioning, her gardens searched, her secrets unearthed. The vials, the lab reports, the testimony from Mrs. Carter, it was enough to build a case. But for Sarah, the real battle was internal. How do you reconcile the mother you loved with the monster she became? Therapy helped slowly. Mia and Lucas, resilient as children are, began to heal, their trust in Sarah unshaken. Months later, Sarah sat in her new apartment, miles from her childhood home. The kids were laughing in the next room, their voices a balm to her scarred heart. She learned to trust her instincts, to fight for those she loved, even when it meant breaking her own heart. Mrs. Carter's unexpected courage had shown her that allies can come from the unlikeliest places, and that truth, however painful, is a light that burns away deceit. The trash can at the potluck had been more than a receptacle for poisoned food. It was a symbol of Sarah's refusal to let harm come to her children, a public stand against betrayal. She didn't regret it. Sometimes, love means throwing out what's toxic, no matter how deeply it's woven into your life. For Sarah, that act of defiance wasn't just about survival, it was about reclaiming her power, her family, and her future